Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about one very important topic in macroeconomics, that is known as what you call as stagflation. What is stagflation? We'll learn about it today, and how it is important for the monetary policy as well as government, and how to control this stagflation or how to manage this stagflation in the real. Okay, so let's start with the basic things first. So what will be our basic things? So first, like in your macroeconomics, you must have heard about this topic, that is your what do you call as inflation, right? So what is inflation? The overall rise of the price level during certain year. So in India, we take like what is happening over a year. Like last year, what was the price, and now this year, what is the price, and what is the percentage change over the last year? We called it as inflation. Similarly, many of us also heard about this word deflation. Deflation means when your price level is falling. Inflation means your price level is increasing. So inflation means price level is increasing, and this means your price level is deflation is price level is decreasing. Okay, so this is the most the fundamental thing about inflation and deflation. But sometimes you must have heard these words, let's call stagflation. Okay, so what is this stagflation? Okay, so this word was actually is a mix of two words. I mean, two economic scenarios. First one is stagnant growth. Okay, stagnant growth plus high inflation, or you can say recession plus inflation. That means you are actually facing a situation when actually your economic activity is falling, but at the same time your price level is also increasing. Or in other way, you can say that your unemployment is increasing because there are no jobs, economic activity is going down, but at the same time your inflation is very high. So this term actually was first introduced by McLeod, used the word in 1965. Please remember that it is in 1965. He used in a parliamentary speech where he was telling about high inflation and unemployment. So he was talking about a scenario when there is a high inflation as well as high unemployment. Okay, so this was the situation. So now the question is, how can it happen? Like in an economy, whenever the income level is going down, people don't have that much of income, then at that time how inflation is going up? Okay, how this situation arises? So this is the most important thing, that how this type of situation arises in an economy. So now let's talk about this very simple framework that is called aggregate supply or aggregate demand framework. Okay. So now suppose that you are in this equilibrium, right? So this is your aggregate supply, this is your aggregate demand, and you are in this equilibrium. Suddenly, some of your parts of your total aggregate demand increases. So here aggregate demand means this part. See the right side. So this is the aggregate demand: consumption, investment, government expenditure, export minus import. If anyone, like if consumption increases or investment increases or government expenditure increases or there is a demand from the outsider, so then your aggregate demand will increase. So now whenever there is an aggregate demand, rise in aggregate demand, then what happens? So in that case, your curve will shift to this upward, right? Your curve will shift upward. So when your curve will shift upward, now you will go to another equilibrium where you are having higher income. Okay, your income increased as well as your price level also increased. Are you getting? Your price level also increased and your income also increased. So that means you are entering into a boom phase. Okay, boom means that means your economic activity is also increasing and your price also increasing, which is very obvious, right? Which is very obvious. But see, certain situation may come in a different way. Like the situation may come in a different way. For example, आप देख सकते हो कि यहाँ पे जो एग्रीगेट डिमांड है, सपोज यू दिस इज योर एग्रीगेट डिमांड, okay, I mean this is your aggregate demand, this is your aggregate supply, and this is your equilibrium. Suddenly what happens, your aggregate supply decreased. Aggregate supply decreased. That means, suppose just imagine in an economy, if everything is fine and suddenly some kind of bad thing happens, like for example the pandemic, or suddenly there is a rise in the crude oil prices. Okay, so in that what happened, farms will not produce. Okay, farms will not produce. Like let's take a simple of cases of COVID. So in corona, I mean in COVID cases, the number of population actually, very few population actually died, but the amount of demand was that much. But what happened during the lockdown, industries were not producing anything. So some factory actually only the essential items were being produced and non-essentials were closed. So what will happen at that time? Your supply decreased. Okay, your supply decreased. So if this happens, then what will happen? This Y will fall, but your price will increase. Are you getting? So your Y will fall and your price will increase. So that is known as your cost plus inflation, or sometimes scenario of stagflation. So your economic activity is falling, but your price level is increasing. Okay, so this chart was aggregate. I mean, this is the aggregate demand shift, and this was aggregate supply shift. Okay, so this is a case of stagflation. This is not a case of stagflation. Okay, so or okay, so these are the main reasons why the stagflation may be, I mean, may be possible for an economy, and it may exist. Okay, so now, if you go to the literature, then what are the main reasons behind the stagflation, right? This, stagflation means what? Your GDP is falling, but your inflation, that is pi, is increasing. So what are the main possible reasons behind it? So one possible reason that is supply side shocks. As I have explained, supply side shocks, if there is an increase in input prices, or something happening like there is a low productivity, or like in 1970s, when there was an increase in the crude oil prices, many farms are not able to produce, but the demand was as it is, so that led to high inflation. But farms, since there is a high cost of crude oil, so at the time farms were not producing anything, So therefore, the supply side shocks could be a possible explanation for stagflation. Okay, for stagflation. Second thing is government policy. So what happens whenever a government adopting a policy which is not favorable for industry, and prints money at the same time, So whenever they print money and they circulate it in the economy, that will lead to higher inflation. But since they have done an unfavorable industrial policy, so that may lead to fall in Y. So if these two are working, then that may also lead to stagflation. Okay. So what are the two explanations for the stagflation? One is supply side shocks, another is government policies. So that will lead to stagflation. So whenever you print money, see this may be a very important thing, because whenever you are printing a lot of money and there is no industry, I mean there is no incentive for the industry to increase their output, sometimes that may lead to what I call is hyperinflation. Okay, hyperinflation. So you see this in the picture. Okay, so sometimes there is so much of hyperinflation that whatever amount you can buy, like for, let's take an example, like amount of you can buy. So like suppose within 20 rupees you are able to buy 1 kg of potato. Now if 1 kg of potato now costs 200 rupees, then that means the 20 rupees note is worthless. It can't buy anything else, right? So at that time this type of situation may arise. Okay, so all of you got it. So these are the two reasons that why stagflation may occur. Now, see, I have told you that in demand side case, whenever there is an increase in economic activity, there is also increase in prices. So that means there is a negative. So there is a positive relationship between. Okay, there is a positive relationship between output and inflation. Okay, output and inflation. So since by Okun's law, okay, this output and unemployment are also related but in negative direction. So therefore there is a negative relationship between unemployment and inflation. So here they are referring wage inflation. So this is known as what? This is known as Phillips curve. So Phillips curve is very simple. Whenever there is a high unemployment, that means low economic activity, the inflation is also low, correct? Which is very straightforward to understand, correct? And here this Keynesian thoughts, like the Keynesian economics, which actually took born in 1930s, they believe on this kind of ideology. This kind of thoughts that there is a positive association between economic growth and inflation. Okay, so that is what Keynesian. They have never explained what is stagflation. Stagflation is just the reverse of it, right? High inflation, but high unemployment also. Okay, so they have not discussed about it. Phillips curve. No, but in certain periods, this relationship, that is a negative relationship between Phillips curve and unemployment, did not hold. For example, you see what happened in the US during 1970s. So do you think this is happening because of this? Do you think this type of negative relationship is happening here? No, it's not happening. So Phillips curve, okay, is not holding here. If Phillips curve is not holding, why? Why at that time it's not holding? Just see in the right side picture. What was the rise in crude oil prices? Rise in crude oil prices during that period. So this is the main reason. This is the main reason why this happened. Okay. So during 1970s, Phillips curve failed. Okay. This Phillips curve failed during 1970s. Then what happened? The Milton Friedman and Edmund Phelps, they actually provided an explanation that what could be the possible reasons, and also they given this that even they thought that okay, this Phillips curve may also shift. Okay, Phillips curve also may shift. So they gave augmented Phillips curve. Okay, so actually this was the first scenario I seen when the stagflation came into the picture. This is the first scenario when stagflation came into the picture. Whenever there was high unemployment, that is low economic growth, but high inflation. Okay, so all of you got it. So what is Phillips curve? Phillips curve is the positive association between economic growth and inflation. Then what is stagflation? Stagflation is just the reverse of Phillips curve relationship. There is a possibility of low economic growth and high inflation. Okay. Now let's think about it. It's very important to understand that okay, suppose you are an economist and you are sitting and your policymaker is asking if stagflation is happening in the economy, so what you should do? So what you should do? First thing, so now let's go to monetary policy. So monetary policy may think that okay, shall I increase interest rate so that my inflation will go down? Okay, if I increase interest rate, my inflation will go down. But if you do this thing, then what will happen? Your economic growth will also fall. Correct? That means during stagflation time, your growth is stagnant. By increasing interest rate, you are going to further stagnate the growth. Okay, only because you want that to reduce the inflation. So this may not be liked by your policymaker, because okay, during the recessionary time, how can you increase interest rate? Okay, so at that time, then you should not increase interest rate. Okay, you should not, but rather you should think of something other policy instruments that may be helpful. But sometimes what happens if this inflation is very, very high? Because see, if you take any kind of central bank or monetary authority, so their mandate is for price stability. So their mandate is price stability. So they may focus on inflation, or they may check the inflation, so that should not be a hyperinflation. But of course, it is very less likely to be hyperinflation, because your economic growth is also not good. So people don't have income, so they may not have high demand that will lead to hyperinflation. But however, being a monetary authority, you need to be very cautious about this dilemma. Okay, something may happen, so you have to be very cautious and you have to be very careful while deciding on the monetary policy. Okay, now let's talk about the fiscal policy. What fiscal policy can do? So fiscal policy say that, okay, if I will increase G, because that is in my hand, okay, or I will reduce tax rate, something I can do, right? If I am increasing government expenditure, what will happen? That will increase that will shift your aggregate demand curve. That will lead to further inflation. So that will lead to further inflation. So a higher government expenditure may not be a suitable policy during this time. So what you will do then? Then there is another policy. Okay, you decrease your tax rate. If you decrease your tax rate, so that might be helpful, because once you decrease the tax rate, okay, so that may lead to higher production, and that will improve your economic growth. But at the same time, it also might lead to lower inflation, because if your tax rate is low, then firms may reduce the I mean, they may not set higher prices, but they moderate their prices while they're setting. So that may lead to lower inflation. So you understand. So in whenever you have a stagflation, then monetary policy may not be that effective. Okay, but they are watchdog. They will be careful while doing the monetary policy. But fiscal policy has a lot of role playing in it, so that they can improve the economic growth. Okay, so now let's see about US. So when does US has a hyperinflation? See, just see this scenario. Okay, here. So these shaded regions are regions when US has a recession. But at that time, inflation was also very high. Correct? See this phase and this phase. Inflation was very high. So these are the main phases when your economic phases whenever you are having low economic growth but higher inflation. Okay, higher inflation. Okay, so but here it is not the case, because as you can see that when in the global financial crisis phase, that is your global financial crisis phase, in this case recession, but inflation was also very low. So it's not a case of stagflation, but these are the cases of stagflation. Okay, now let's look back to India. In India also, these regions, actually these said regions are the US economic recessions. In India also, when we have low growth but high inflation, like this is our consumer price index, right? This is your inflation, and this is your GDP growth. So you see, this phase may be characterized as this phase when our economic growth was low but inflation was very high. You also can look at this phase. Okay, in this case economic growth is low but inflation is high. Okay, and this might be case, but it's not so severe. But I think this one and this one, these are the phases when this actually India actually faced a stagflation. And now during COVID phases, people are discussing about this stagflation, okay, the role the stagflation, but actually have to look beyond that, actually what is happening in the inflation front. Okay. So these are the news articles that are happening. Okay, on stagflation, how stagflation is important. I mean, hampering the economic growth or happening the welfare of the economy. And many great economists actually, and also policymakers are actually discussing about it. Okay, so these are the main uh, concepts and the region concepts and the um, analytics behind stagflation and its role in policy making and how we can improve the policy making. Okay, thank you so much for watching the video. Okay, see you in the next video. Thank you so much.